longer-term data that suggests that the preoccupation with money will soon become something of a less intense part of our society than it is now.
What do you mean?
I mean that because of what we're facing over these next few years, the social order, how we interact, our general social contract will change, and we're going to start seeing the emergence of what we've been calling SOCs, self-organizing collectives. And so we'll start interacting with each other in a different way that will be less exchange-based and less money-based. And
almost communal?
There won't be this huge culture of celebrity or this culture of wealth.
Geez, I'm not going to miss that. Almost communal, you're describing.
No, not really.
No.
What it is, George, is right now global corporatism works because instead of having a guy who makes shoes in Tyler, Texas, to serve the folks of the Tyler area, we found somebody cheaper to make our shoes for us in Indonesia, India, China, Pakistan, Singapore, all of these other places, right? And so the intrinsic value of the shoe is always the same. The reason globalism works is because it takes cheap labor overseas, turns it into goods and services, and ships them to America.
And what makes them cheap? The plentiful printing of dollars.
Right. So we just print up dollars and play the labor rate differential.
Yeah, and that's coming home to roost. I mean,
that's
what we've seen.
That's going to come home to roost in a huge way. And as a result, we're going to go through a period more than likely, if we're reading the data right, probably a good primer for how to prepare would be something like Dmitry Orlov's book, Reinventing Collapse, how really Russia was, the Soviet Union, was more prepared for the kind of economic dislocation than we are in America, because we are almost totally dependent on the Internet, on the electric power grid, and so forth, whereas large parts of the Soviet Union were relatively low-tech, and yet they still went through a horrific period of collapse and resource stripping, gleaning from garbage, all of that kind of stuff. We don't want to think about that. It's just not comfortable. So along comes October 7th through March of next year, and like it or not, linguistically, based on Clif's work, that's what's coming down the pike.
What's this period, September 22nd to the 27th?
That's a plateau of building tension. Everybody's all upset. We're currently in a mode where your stomach is tight over this economic thing. It doesn't sit well. Your muscles are tense. You're not sleeping right. There's more and more building language about it. So we're going to get to the point where we're at a point now where this level of tension will be sustained with more or less little tiny blips up and down until we get to the 7th, and then it releases and it goes into release language.
I was sort of talking about this becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm just wondering, and I know you got to be careful in this regard, but people out there want to buy a car. They're thinking about buying a house. This is not a time to be maybe jumping into something like that where you're extending yourself.
You got to start asking yourself the question in a different way. Am I willing to put myself into further debt and enslavement to someone for that particular possession? Because that's what you're facing right now. If you have credit cards, you're a debt slave to those credit cards because the powers that be passed laws, the new Bankruptcy Act, which says you can't walk away from those. And
right.
If you do, by the way, and they forgive you, then you still owe the government tax on all that's been forgiven. If you run up $30,000 worth of debt, pay it off for $3,000 in a settlement, then you still owe tax on the $27,000 delta.
Right, they consider it income.
Correct.
Tell me this. We're describing a pretty grim scene here, the economic consequences.
Right.
Is there something else, though? Or when you're talking about dire consequences, is there something else looming out there that's maybe even worse after the monumental?
We can put it this way. The situation is complex, which means it's not going to be a single trigger and a single element that causes all of our distress. We have certain ratios, if you will, that suggest that it's going to be about 45 to 48% economic and something close to 40% military, and then the rest will be what we call para-intrusions or earth activities in the form of hurricanes or large storms, that kind of thing.
Well, when you're talking about military, you mean our military acting or somebody else's military acting?
We get militaries as archetypes, and we can't go with geographic. It is most likely us because who's got the biggest military on the planet? Who's got the most stressed out military? Who's got the most concerning dysfunctional military leadership at the civilian level. Well, hey, we got to claim that title, folks.
On the other hand, whether it's martial law or a military reaction to some terrorist event,
real or imagined,
or
manufactured.
Manufactured. Yeah, we're trying to be subtle about that. But yeah, that's coincidentally, if you look at how 9/11 happened, we were in a huge economic collapse then, which was the blow up of the internet bubble. The internet bubble was blowing up. Along came Osama bin Laden and the 9/11 crew, and what happens? We have a war on terror. We are overnight able to mobilize the same scale of economic response that characterized the Works Progress Administration back in the 1930s and the Civilian Conservation Corps and so forth.
Magnified by the size of our population and the speed of the communication. Let's not forget that. That's why this situation is going to be different
than the Great Depression. We'll call it the Great Delevering.
I mean, do you see, because of this economic turmoil, the possibility of a manufactured terrorist event that leads to other dramatic, terrible things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, how certain is that? I mean, do you have a scale?
There's the rub. We have that's within our 45% maximum of a military component for what we're facing.
And is there any value in you talking about it in terms of value? I mean, that it is not inevitable.
No, we can't. We don't have anything that would do anything other than induce panic unnecessarily. Panic is good. I mean, it's an emotional reaction. It causes the body to do things when survival is necessary.
But is it inevitable is what I'm wondering.
I don't know. Now, there's an idea. Let's talk about this hypothetically. Let's assume that George and I are not doing this, okay? But if, for instance, one knew the future to a certain extent, could one hijack the future knowing that the planet is really run in this complex sort of a matrix that we'll call constant co-creation or constant creation? It may be possible to do so. In other words, if enough people knew, if you had 5 million people sitting around on September the 10th saying, I wonder what those bastards are up to. What's going to happen tomorrow? Would it have happened? Ask yourself that.
Well, we've got 2 million who are listening to you right now. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, we would love to be spectacularly wrong.
It would be perfect. It would be great.
Yeah.
I would have a happy life. I'm an old bald guy. I don't need this. My ambition for career goal is to be a boat bum. I would finish my boat and go happily sailing off.
Well, this is sort of where we began this interview, and I asked George if it's a coincidence, that you're there in Texas, and he mentioned you building your boat. But it sounds like both of you guys are getting ready for what you think is going to happen.
Well, the reason for the boat we haven't even gotten into yet.
I'm only 135 feet off the water where I'm at.
Well, let's talk about the boat.
Basically, what I am assuming is going to occur because of some data we've got that suggests that in 2009 we're going to have what's called a global coastal event, and it's going to be disruptive to the global human society. Doesn't necessarily mean giant tsunami. It could be as little as a 5-foot tide differential, and no boats could dock, for instance. If it were a 30-foot wave or a small tsunami or something like this, we might lose bridges all over, and we may need boats for transportation in the area I'm at, because without bridges, we can't move, as was recently illustrated when Washington State got flooding in Lewis County and shut down a few miles of I-5 with very little water, actually. So it's kind of a thing to sort of prepare for. If you're living around a lot of water and water stops you from going anywhere and it's also a resource, might be handy to have a boat in the next year or two.
I think maybe I'm safe here in the Mojave Desert, but
yeah, you should be. But on the other hand, December 10 through 12, we've also got a China-sized earthquake coming up in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
This global coastal event, could it be something as subtle as the global warming stuff?
It could be. It could also be something like a big mass of ice that's currently sitting on some land, sliding off, and causing over the course of 5 or 6 months, again, another long-term event, this global coastal event that we're going to be experiencing.
Well, I'll tell you, fellas, it's a fascinating conversation, but you're no barrel of laughs here so far.
No one likes to talk about it anymore, yeah.
Maybe we'll look for some fun stuff when we come back after this break. It's a fascinating stuff. We'll be right back with more Coast to Coast AM. We've got Clif and George with us, 2 fascinating guys, witty and bright and fun and intelligent, and they have just about been the biggest downer I've ever had on the program. Nothing personal, guys. But, gosh, this is...
Well, let me get it even a little bit spookier for you then.
Oh, boy, here we go.
This was suggested by one of my subscribers, and I think, while dramatic, it's a good illustration of what we're looking at. But imagine that it's now, well, my clock shows that it's 7 minutes after 12 a.m. And let's fast forward here, and we're sitting there on October 6th at 12:07. In 3 minutes' time, the planet is going to start shifting into release language. The difference between building tension language and release language is that in building tension, as you can imagine, your muscles and body contract. They want to hold you in. It relates to angst, anxiety, worries about what might happen. Release language, on the other hand, your body goes slack. You may actually get stunned. You may fall over. You may faint. Things loosen up. You lose cohesion. And it's all after the fact. And the language that comes out about it is expressing how you're feeling as a result of that. So you've released because the event or events that you were worried about have already occurred, or that you didn't even see coming. That's the worst kind of a case, where you're suddenly surprised by it. So in just about 2 minutes' time now, a few weeks in the future, the planet's going to start going through this period. It's not going to happen all at once. I'm not going to get it at the same time George will necessarily. It'll depend on where you are, when you wake up, what the events actually are, and the speed at which the planet rotates. But that's 1,000 miles an hour. So it might go pretty quick. And then the ultimate speed of how fast this spreads has to do with the speed of communication. Again, fairly fast.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, I would like to have you back on the program and see how this goes and what came true and what didn't. But that's assuming there could be a program. I mean, in the scenario you're talking about, I would imagine that communications lines, cell phones, computers, radio, things would be disabled.
They get disrupted, yes. Yeah. But it may be something, I mean, we get into speculation. George and I waste endless hours saying, oh, it could be this, it could be that, what fits the scenario, what doesn't, and so on. But it could be something as such as a false flag attack in some part of the world that's not necessarily the U.S. It could be U.S.-centered. It might be something that's a slow boil in the sense that it's a release of some kind of a bioagent that takes 3 weeks before the sudden gasp that we all realize that it has happened. However, the language would start happening to those people that are affected at the point of the impact and spread out from there.
You see anything with nukes in it? You talked about
we see that all the time, but that's one of, it's like politics and religion. There are certain subjects that are so hot that linguistically that it's very hard to pick up any nuance. And without nuance, we really can't make predictions because it's hard to find the archetypes among the language being used.
On the other hand, we have to point out that, in all fairness, the period that we're in right now, the September 15 through 27, we're expecting to see elements of a prequel. In other words, events that will set the stage. And among these, at least I look at this Pakistan hotel bombing and the, quote, terrorism involved there, and I'm going, oh, gosh, I hope that doesn't fit into it, because we do have a couple of numbers that have popped out using the same approach that popped out with the number 300,000 dead or driven back to a previous age prior to the Banda Aceh quake. That quake occurred in December of 2004. The 300,000 popped out in Clif's work in August or so. So we do have a couple of really big numbers that are quite worrisome about what this October 7 event could be.
You know, you guys, I don't know if you listen to Coast, but there are a lot of folks who have come on over the years and had dire predictions and things. There was the whole Y2K thing. More recently, there's been a lot of speculation about 2012 and the Mayan calendar. We'll get into that in a minute. But, you know, a lot of these predictions have been made and in history. The end of the world is coming, and they haven't come true. So it really does strike me, though, that you're dealing with something on a different level than guesswork or a vision or something like that.
We get things wrong all the time.
Oh, that's good.
Well, fortunately, very unfortunately, we get things right, and when we are right, it tends to be spectacularly so.